Hello everyone and welcome to a replica airguns video. My name is Michael K. Today we are revisiting the blowback airgun versus non-blowback airgun. I wouldn't call this a debate, but I do often get questions about this, or people with strong opinions about this, which style of gun they prefer or think is the only style that people should own or have. And I have already made a video about this. I'll put a link in here to the original video. I may address some things a little differently in that video. But I wanted to revisit this because this is a common question or a common statement people make, and I get a lot of new subscribers, and many of you may have not actually seen my original video. It's kind of down the video list a little bit now, and so I thought I'd just make another video to readdress this subject. Now the questions I get, or the statements I get, are people asking me, what's the best type of gun to get, blowback versus non-blowback? Sometimes I have people asking me, why would someone ever buy a blowback airgun because it uses so much CO2 and gets less FPS per shot? And then there's other people again who say, why would you buy a non-blowback gun? You don't get that realistic recoil feel. The action isn't the same. They're just not as fun to shoot. So today I'm going to address this and talk about the pros and the cons for each style of gun, and then let everybody decide what style is right for them. Alright, so let's get into some of the pros, and I'm going to talk about the blowback guns first, then I'm going to talk about the non-blowback guns. Alright, so blowback guns, they simulate the recoil much better than non-blowback guns because the slide moves back and forth when you shoot it. So now I've taken out the BBs, there's no BBs in this gun, and I'm just going to basically fire off a few rounds just so you can see what I'm talking about in terms of the action. See how my hand moves a little bit of wrist movement? You're not going to get that with a non-blowback gun, right? And I'll show you what I'm talking about here. Here's a non-blowback gun, and let's just take it off safe. Ooh, that's amazing. Now I know there's no CO2 coming out of it, but it's not going to make any difference. The CO2 coming out the front really doesn't have much recoil, and I'm going to be talking about recoil in air guns and blank guns in another video, so make sure to watch that one. Now in most cases, blowback guns are going to have better trigger actions because a lot of times their single action trigger is true single action. Not all the time, but lots of times. So here's the 1911, and basically I don't have any CO2 or anything in it right now. I could put some CO2 in it just to dramatize this a little bit. So here we have, and I'm just going to show you, I'm going to decock it quickly here for you. So it's decocked. You'll notice I can't fire anything with the hammer forward. It's not going to do anything. So once you pull the slide back, the hammer gets cocked automatically, and you'll notice the hammer is going to cock back after each shot. So here we go. Right? And the slide will catch back on the last BB. See, again, my wrist. Look at the movement I'm getting. Lots of heavy blowback action recoil. And notice how the hammer is coming back, and look at how little trigger pull I have to use. That's it. True single action trigger. I can get really quick shots, really quick. Watch this. Right? Fast. So the action is fast, makes for a really good action shooter. You're not going to get that with a double action trigger. See, I'm struggling to shoot fast, but I got all this motion to go. I've got all the hammer, all this pull, all the drag from the hammer coming back each time. Now if it was in single action, I can shoot this gun in single action. Trigger pulls shorter and easier, but in order to do that I got to cock it back with my thumb for each shot to get single action only. Now if you don't know what single action versus double action is, watch my video. I've made a video talking about that. And if you're the kind of person, just sort of elaborating on this, that wants a true single action gun to replicate the real steel gun, like this 1911 with a single action trigger, then you need a blowback gun to simulate that action. And so because of that, you're going to find that blowback guns are better suited for action shooting because they generally shoot a little quicker. The trigger's shorter, lighter, and that gives you a much quicker rate of fire. Now we're not talking about full auto or anything, but the trigger reset is short, the trigger pull is short, the trigger pull is light. You can just shoot them faster. Now blowback guns are better for prop guns, especially if you're actually shooting them as a prop. Now if you're not shooting it as a prop, if you're just holding it, it really won't make a difference. But if you're shooting it and you want to get that blowback action and you want to see the gun moving around a little bit, then they're going to be better for prop guns in movies, films, stage, what have you. Now because blowback guns have a lot of working parts. They've got working slides. A lot of times they field strip like the original gun. You can see right through the mag wells because they generally have a lot of times big full-size mags. All the parts work, floating barrels, very similar and true to the real steel versions. They're just more realistic in terms of how they're put together. With the non-blowback guns, in many cases you're going to find fixed parts. You don't need to have a true slide catch release. You don't need to have a lot of working parts. The slide is molded into the gun essentially. It's non-functioning. Nothing really, happens with this one. This is a non-blowback gun. But the only thing you have that works really is this safety and of course the hammer and the magazine release. But other than that, it's not really as realistic or mechanically true to the real version. Alright, so let's talk about some non-blowback gun pros. Non-blowback guns generally use less CO2. Why is this? Because you don't need to make the slide go back and forth, so you're not moving a heavy slide, you're not using CO2 to move a heavy slide, therefore they're a little more efficient. Now a lot of today's blowback guns are getting more and more efficient, and a lot of them are capable of 100 plus shots per CO2, so the gap is narrowing. Now with a non-blowback gun, you can get as many as with today's new guns and efficient guns as many as 200 shots per CO2. So potentially double, but still 100 shots out of a CO2 is not bad. Typically speaking, you're going to find non-blowback guns will get higher FPS performance overall. On average, they're going to shoot a little faster, a little hotter, and again, because you're not taking some of that CO2 energy to move the slide back and forth, it's all going towards propelling that BB forward. That said, there are blowback guns that get up into the 400 and 450 plus range, but you can get a lot of non-blowback pistols, if we're comparing pistols, CO2 pistols, that are closer to 500. A lot of them are going to be up and over 400, whereas with blowback guns, most of them are just under 400 or just touching or reaching 400 FPS. Now some people feel that blowback guns, because of the recoil, it affects the accuracy. Personally, I don't find that. I think maybe it's the user. If you're not used to the recoil, if your grip isn't just so, and perhaps you're anticipating that recoil and it's throwing off your accuracy, then I could see that affecting accuracy for some blowback shooters. Plus, with some blowback guns, because they're so realistic, they have floating barrels, there's the potential for some looseness, I guess, or a little bit of barrel movement that could throw off accuracy. But I've seen many blowback guns shoot just as accurately as non-blowback guns. Again, it depends on the gun and it depends on the shooter. You'll also find in many cases that non-blowback guns will be more reliable, less problematic, and the reason for this is they just have less moving parts. There's less stuff going on with the gun, there's less to go wrong. And because there's less moving parts, or the non-blowback guns are typically more simplified, you're going to find that they're generally a little bit less expensive than blowback guns. Less manufacturing cost, but this isn't always true. There's some very, very high quality non-blowback guns that will cost you an arm and a leg. So don't think that just because it's not blowback, it's going to be cheap or inexpensive. Alright, let's get into some of the cons. Blowback guns generally get less shots per CO2, and again, this is going to reiterate some of what we've already talked about, but that blowback action, that slide moving back and forth is going to take some energy. It's going to use up some CO2. They will get less shots per CO2 on average over non-blowback guns. Blowback guns generally have lower FPS. Again, that slide moving back and forth takes energy, takes that away from the BB going forward. But still, there are blowback guns that can get up and over 400 feet per second, no problem. And again, blowback guns can be less accurate. Already talked about it, and it's true. Depends on the shooter, depends on the gun. But if you were to take a bunch of blowback guns and shoot them on targets compared to non-blowback guns, and take a bunch of shooters and do a scientific test, you'll probably find that the group using non-blowback guns will shoot a little more accurately. And because blowback guns have more moving parts, more going on, there are going to be more reliability issues, more things to go wrong. That is a con. And again, because there's more moving parts, more manufacturing costs for blowback guns, they tend to be a little more costly overall over non-blowback guns. Alright, let's get into the cons for the non-blowback guns. They don't simulate the recoil, so you're not going to get that experience or real shooting experience that you get with blowback guns. They're not going to have that single action only trigger. If you want to shoot single action with a non-blowback gun, you've got to pre-cock that hammer and then you can shoot it. Again, the double action triggers when you're shooting non-blowback guns are usually a longer pull, heavier pull, and again, that can actually affect accuracy, so keep that in mind. If you're pulling a long trigger that's heavy and you're not shooting in single action only, when you're shooting quickly, a blowback gun may actually have the advantage in accuracy over a non-blowback gun. And in terms of prop guns, if you're actually shooting a gun or a non-blowback air gun, it's not going to be as realistic as the blowback gun. You're not going to see the action. You're not going to see the slide moving back and forth. So if you're making a movie or a film or a YouTube video and you want to have a realistic gun simulation, a blowback gun will be better than a non-blowback gun for that use. And again, because most blowback guns have to have similar working parts, moving slides, hammers, barrels, floating barrels, removable mags, field strippable in many cases, they are just more realistic overall than non-blowback guns. They can have many of their parts molded right into the gun and non-functioning, because all you really need for a non-blowback gun is a trigger, a CO2 valve, some sort of internal or external hammer, and you're good to go. Alright, that wraps up this comparison between blowback air guns versus non-blowback air guns. Again, this isn't to say which one's better. It depends on the person, what they're using the gun for. I personally own both styles of guns. My personal preference, I would say I lean a little bit more towards blowback guns because I like the realism. I like the single action triggers. For me, they're just a little more fun to shoot, and I'm not really concerned about CO2 use or feet per second, because at the end of the day, the difference between 400 and 500 feet per second isn't going to make that big a difference for me. Alright, thank you for watching another Replica Airguns video. Don't forget to subscribe before you head out. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter. The username is Replica Airguns. Come on down to replicaairguns.com where we have all kinds of articles and reviews with photos and things like that for you to check out. You can also visit our online Canada and US Replica Airgun stores where we sell air guns, BB guns, pellet guns, airsoft guns, blank guns, knives, and other accessories. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.